So as we get started, of course, the thing that I want to wish all of us again is Happy Easter. Happy Easter. There you go. You guys have been practicing. I love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's funny is that we tend to think of Christmas as a bigger holiday. And, of course, you can't get Easter without Christmas. So it's certainly the backstory sort of thing for Easter. But Easter is really the foundation of the Christian faith, right? That what we celebrate as Easter is that we believe something miraculous happened. That we believe that Jesus had predicted his own death and resurrection, and he pulled it off, right? He actually did what he said he would do, that one day he would be arrested and executed, but when he was executed, he would return. And that's what we celebrate on Easter, that he did indeed return. And what it really comes down to is that faith in that event, right? Because the foundation of Christianity is faith in that event. And I get it. We can all struggle to kind of fully kind of understand that. And I don't know that any of us can fully understand it. But it's faith that it happened that is the foundation of this transformed relationship with God. As I kind of said in the opening there, that it's a personal relationship. That's a relationship tied to connection. It's a relationship anchored in love. It's an event that frees us from feeling like we have to be good enough. That one of the unique markers of Christianity versus other religions is that we don't hope that we're acceptable after we die. Like, man, did I get in? The promise of Jesus is that we can know on the front end, right? Because through our faith in Jesus, we enter into a relationship that begins now, begins today. And it's a relationship that we walk in and that we grow in, all based on faith. And as we look at the events of Easter, as I'll do in just a moment, the thing that I want to encourage us to think about is that because of the events of Easter, that Jesus has given us some extraordinary things. The word we use is salvation, but really it comes down to this lasting relationship that begins today and carries into eternity. But also, when we look at what Jesus teaches us and what Jesus shows us and what Jesus calls us to do, that the events of Easter are not just about what we get, but what we are indeed called to do. So my hope is as we kind of look at the events of Easter and all the things that went on that day, that we recognize that with this gift that we receive is a call to make a difference, right? To care for one another, to love one another, to realize that we are all made up of both physical needs, emotional needs, and a spiritual needs and spiritual existence. And in that, and embracing that, recognizing that we are called to walk through life with one another, helping to meet those needs with one another, meeting physical needs, supporting each other in emotional challenges, and then being willing to share our faith and walk with people in that journey of faith to recognize that we all grow in that faith. To recognize that when we look at this idea of putting our faith in Jesus, that it is not an end point. It's actually a starting point of a lifelong journey of growth and transformation and living connection with one another to share that journey with other people. Now, as we look back on the events of the first Easter this morning, it's important to understand that there's a lot we have in common with those folks because they are human beings, right? So when they experienced the events of Easter, it had a deep meaning to them and it called them to action. And I think as we look at it, it should have a deep meaning to us, or at least has the opportunity to have a deep meaning to us. And we can also find a call to action. But there is something that's really important to remember that is different for us from the people who experienced the very first Easter. That we're on this side of the resurrection, right? So as we look at Easter, we're looking back on it, right? So for us, as we look at those events, we kind of have this way that we commonly celebrate the Easter season, right? That we kind of start with Palm Sunday, and then we get into what we sometimes call Maundy Thursday, the Thursday of the Last Supper, and as Jesus gets arrested and is tried, and then he's executed on what we call Good Friday. And generally speaking, the next thing that we look at is today. We celebrate the resurrection. Woohoo, he's back. All is good. But here's the thing. For those who were there in the first century, it wasn't anything like that. For those who were there, It was a painful experience, because it's important to understand that they had given up so much to follow Jesus. Right? They had gone against the leadership of that time to follow Jesus. And, and many of them were kind of becoming outlaws for following Jesus. And as they went through Palm Sunday, which was kind of this really celebratory day, and then they see the arrest happen Thursday night into Friday, and they reflect on the meal they had shared with Jesus Thursday night, where he kept saying that he was going to go away and return, and they didn't really know what he was talking about. And then he dies. And the person that they had invested everything into, who they believed was a king who would reign forever, is dead. And they thought they'd gotten it wrong. They thought that the person they'd put all their hope into, although he was a wonderful teacher and a wonderful man, he wasn't a king that was going to reign forever. I mean, if we think about the fact that if we look at the definition of the word Christian being someone who's put their faith in Jesus, on Saturday, the Saturday after Jesus is killed, there are no Christians, because they are all convinced they've gotten it wrong. And for them, there's this incredible weight, right? Because Jesus, he died. And now they go into their Sabbath, right? So for them, with Sabbath, that means on Friday night at sundown, they really can't go do anything. They have to kind of largely stay at home. And they really can't do anything until nighttime on Saturday. And they've been carrying that weight all that time. And so as we step into the events of that very first Easter, that's the mindset of the people who were there, that they are filled with sadness. And many of them would have been filled with hopelessness and literally I don't know what I'm going to do next. So as we jump into the events of that first Easter, the gospel writer Mark tells us this. Saturday evening, when the Sabbath ended, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome went out and purchased burial spices so they could anoint Jesus' body. So what they're doing is these three ladies are kind of getting down to business. Right? They're saying, well, Jesus is dead, and as part of our traditions, we want to actually treat his body a certain way during his burial. And because of the timing of the events, by the time he was buried in his tomb, there was no chance to do all those things. So what they've done is that once the Sabbath ends, they go out to the market and they buy all the things they need to prepare a buried body. But of course, by now it's like nighttime and they can't really do it. So now they've got to sit all through Saturday night into Sunday morning. And as the narrative continues, it says, very early on Sunday morning, just at sunrise, they went to the tomb. On the way there, they were asking each other, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb? But as they arrived, they looked up and saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled aside. Now, again, there's a real key difference in their experience from ours, because one of the symbols that we use today of Jesus' resurrection is an empty tomb, right? Kind of a cave with a rock rolled off to the side. So we're like, that's a sign of victory. But that's not what they thought. They were going to visit Jesus' body because Jesus was dead. So we see that as a symbol of joyfulness, of Jesus' resurrection and all that it means. For them, they think someone has broken into the tomb. So this this horrible event of their lives, of Jesus dying, just got worse. Because they're wondering if grave robbers have gotten inside of there, or has somebody gone in there and done something horrible with the body. So for them, it's just getting heavier and it's getting harder. So they approach the tomb just to see exactly what happened. But as they get there, the gospel writer Mark tells us that when they entered the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a white robe sitting on the right side. The women were shocked. And what it tells us is that they're looking in there and they see this person who looks kind of different to them, and they realize that it's an angel, that Jesus really is gone. And there's this angel there, and the angel's there to kind of remind them of some things. Because the gospel writer Luke tells us that this is what the angel says. The angel says, "Why are you looking among the dead for someone who's alive? He isn't here. He is risen from the dead." In other words, he did what he said he would do. That no one has taken his body. He got up and walked out of here on his own. And as the angel continues, he goes on and says, remember what he told you back in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be betrayed into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and they would rise again on the third day. And then they remembered that he had said this. And so what the angel is saying is that, remember all that stuff that Jesus was telling you, and you're like, it must, I don't know what he means, that he's going to die and he's going to come back. Like, is that a metaphor? Like, I don't know what he's talking about. And the angel said, this is what he's talking about, that he's done exactly what he said that he would do. And that basically what he's saying is that, remember what you learned from Jesus would happen. That through his death and resurrection, that he would change things. That's what you're experiencing right now. So for these people, the three women, at this moment, it finally starts to come together. They finally start remembering all the things that Jesus told them. And so the key thing is that they're in this moment of experience where they're remembering, but finally, they're starting to understand. And so the angel then tells them, now go and tell his disciples, including Peter, that Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see Jesus there, just as he told you before he died. And so what we see here is this instruction that the angel has given them. It says, okay, now that you understand, now that you know the work that Jesus did, what does he tell them to do? Share it. Tell somebody else. And this is a recurring theme of the events of Easter, is that once you understand, go and share it. So go tell the other disciples. But there's kind of an interesting part about what the angel says there, because he says, go and tell the other disciples, including Peter. Well, of course, including Peter, right? Peter was kind of the ad hoc leader of the disciples. So why does the angel say, go tell the other disciples, including Peter? Like, maybe you'll forget him. Well, because Peter was having some tragedy of his own and some pain of his own. Because we know that Peter, who had committed that he would always follow Jesus, go anywhere that Jesus went to go, had promised he'd always stay with Jesus, had not done that. Right? When Jesus gets arrested, his disciples scatter. And Peter comes along later, kind of trying to follow along and see what's going on with Jesus. And as Peter gets close to where Jesus is, and he can see Jesus in the distance, someone walks up to Peter and says, hey, you're kind of familiar. Weren't you one of the followers of Jesus? And what does Peter say? Nope, I don't know who he is. And this happens to him twice more, to the point that by the third time someone asks him, it tells us that he starts swearing, going, why are you asking me this? I don't even know who that guy is. And then Jesus dies. And that's his last interaction relating to Jesus. That Peter is now carrying guilt. A guilt that he doesn't know how he could ever apologize to Jesus because Jesus has died. He's ashamed of himself. And he would, in his own mind, very likely would say that, well, I'm not welcome anymore because I failed. And what is the angel doing? Saying, go tell the disciples, including Peter. Make sure Peter knows that he is welcome. That Jesus desires for him to be there. That there's nothing he could have done that would make Jesus not love him or not want him there. And that's true for Jesus. And the message for us is that's true for us. That we can't let our guilt about things that we've done keep us from being willing to approach God. We can't let our fears about what God might think of us or how he's going to feel about us. Or he might forgive other people, but I've done things he could never forgive. And the message for all of us in this is that you are forgiven and you can be forgiven, you are welcome, and God wants to be in that relationship with you. In fact, the message for us is that the more broken we feel, the more we're hurting, the more God calls to us directly, inviting us to be in that relationship with him. That's why the angel says, make sure you also tell Peter. So now, as the angel says all this, he's basically telling these three women to remember what Jesus has told you and head to where he said you would find him. And so the women leave the tomb, and some time goes by, and then finally the gospel author John tells us what happens next. says that Sunday evening, the disciples were meeting behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. And what's happening here is that the disciples, still believing that Jesus is dead, is like the leadership of that time is trying to crush this uprising, right? This kind of group of people who've come together. And they've killed Jesus to crush it. And the other disciples are afraid that, well, maybe they want to kill the rest of us too, right? So they're hiding out. But the narrative tells us that suddenly, Jesus was standing there among them. "Peace be with you," he said. And as Jesus spoke, he showed them the wounds in his hands and his side, and they were filled with joy when they saw the Lord. So Jesus had died, and now they're seeing him standing here in front of them. And he's here showing them, going, no, it really is me. See where I was nailed to the cross. See the wounds I experienced while I was there. I really am here. And so Jesus says, "Peace be with you." Right? In other words, the promise has been fulfilled. You know, and in that, the disciples become joyful because when they thought all hope had been lost, suddenly they have renewed hope. And they're beginning to have understanding of what Jesus actually meant and what he had been talking about and what his resurrection really means. And so they're filled with joy. But I believe that they're not the only ones who were filled with joy. I believe that Jesus was filled with joy. Right? That the work that he came to do was done, right? That he had actually demonstrated to people what God was like, that God truly was a God of love, a God of truth, and wants us to get away from things that are harmful to us, the things we call sin. But it's done with love and compassion. He showed us what it's like to be a person who lives in connection with God. And he had done the work to reconcile us to God, to restore that relationship. And finally, after all that, his followers are beginning to understand. And so now, recognizing that his followers are beginning to understand, Jesus says this: "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I'm sending you." Now that you understand, take peace in that. Understand what it means. Understand that you can be fearless. Because you are now in relationship with God, a deeper relationship with God. But remember what the angel said to the three women at the tomb, right? Now that you understand, do what? Go share it with somebody else. So Jesus is saying, now that you understand, go share it with somebody else. Right? As the Father sent me, so I am sending you. And what this is a central point in the gospel of Jesus Christ, is that as we receive this gift and all that it means in our lives, it's not a gift that we're meant just to hold on to. It's a gift that we're meant to share. And it's a gift that we're meant to grow in and expand our understanding and encounter other people and walk with other people through all the challenges of life so we don't walk alone. And in those relationships, share what you've experienced through Jesus with other people, giving them the chance to experience it. And Jesus repeats this over and over again. And it seems that even though he has instructed his disciples to kind of go out there and, as the Father sent me, so I am sending you, as far as we can tell, they didn't. Because after this encounter in the upper room, Jesus kind of goes away for a time. They're not really sure where he's at. And as far as we can tell, they didn't really do much different than they had been doing. And it seems that as time goes by, they might be becoming a little bit uncomfortable. That this new situation that they're in is a little bit uncomfortable to them. And I know that for me and other people I know, that sometimes when I'm feeling uncomfortable, I start to find comfort or try to find comfort in things I used to know that may be good for me or may not be good for me. Right? And for them, they're trying to find comfort, so they go to something that's really familiar. They go to work. They're like, well, we used to be fishermen. I guess we'll go fishing. And Jesus had invited them to actually be part of something bigger, but they ran back seeking comfort. And I think that's something that we all want to remember. Right? As life amps up and as life gets difficult, we're all drawn to things that aren't good for us. We may be drawn to different things, But we're all drawn to things that aren't good for us. And as pressure turns up and as life becomes uncomfortable, we tend to be tempted to draw back to those things, whatever it might be for you. And what Jesus wants them to understand and what he wants us to understand is that the way we find the greatest comfort is embracing the life that he's called us into. So as these guys are out there fishing this day, they look at the beach and they see Jesus on the beach. Now they haven't seen him in a while and they're excited to see him because they weren't sure what they were supposed to do. Even though he said, I'm sending you. They didn't seem to know what they were supposed to do. So they've seen Jesus again, and so basically they race to get to the beach to see what Jesus is up to. And as they get there, what's Jesus doing? He's cooking breakfast. Like literally, he's cooking breakfast. Continuing to provide this example that he provides over and over again. Right? In the culture of that time, you had rabbis, teachers, and disciples. And in the culture of that time, the disciples served the rabbi. Well, Jesus was their rabbi. He was their teacher. And what was he doing? Serving them. Showing over and over again that in his kingdom, the leaders serve the followers, the strong serve the weak. That those who are capable and able care for those who are less capable and less able. So as they encounter Jesus after all this time, he's busy cooking up breakfast on the beach. So they sit down with Jesus and they have breakfast. And then breakfast finishes. And the narrative tells us that after breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And so when he asked the question, do you love me more than these? What is Jesus talking about? What's these? Do you know that the greatest Bible scholars in the world aren't sure? Generally speaking, it narrows down to a choice of three possible things. That Jesus is either saying to Peter, hey, do you love me, Jesus, more than these other disciples love me? Or he's saying, hey, Peter, do you love me more than you love the other disciples? But the third option, and I think this, in my personal opinion, I think the third option is the most likely. Hey, Peter, do you love me more than these things that give you comfort? That familiar job, that boat that you've fished in for years, those nets that you've sewn up and handled for years? Do you love me more than those things that gave you comfort? Are you willing to step away from those things that gave you comfort to do things that matter, to do things that are bigger? Right? And that's not to say that our work doesn't matter. And we know that Peter continued to fish. But the point is that a life in Jesus is a life that is multidimensional. That of course we have to work, and of course we have to do our jobs. But what do we value most? And what do we want to really do with our lives? And what do we want the remnants and signature of our life to be? And so I think that's the question that he's asking Peter. Now, each time he asked Peter that question, in fact, he asked Peter that question 3 times. Right? And as Jesus says, do you love me more than these? Peter says, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus says, then feed my lambs. And again, Jesus asks it twice more. And each time Peter says yes, he says a slightly different answer. He says, then take care of my sheep. And third time he says, then feed my sheep. In other words, if you love me, if you're entering into this relationship of love, do the thing that I've asked you to do. And I think there's a couple things going on here. Now, there's a question of why did Jesus ask this question of Peter 3 times? And what I've heard some folks say is that, well, Peter failed 3 times. So Jesus asked him, do you love me 3 times? To give to give Peter a chance to offset his 3 mistakes. Right? You denied me 3 times. I'm going to give you 3 chances to say you love me. I don't think that's very likely. Because I don't believe our relationship with Jesus works at all like that. But I don't know about your life, but if I go through my life, and I look at every time I've hurt someone, every time I've let someone down, every time I've actually could have helped and chose not to, every time I've willfully taken actions that I know are harmful to myself, if I had to put that in one big long list, I can't say I love you enough times. Don't do that. You guys are laughing at me. Am I the only one? Because that's not what it's about. By the way, your laughs at me are invited, by the way. I don't want anybody to feel bad about that. I'm just kind of making a point, right? That we're all in that journey. We're all in that place. And so it's not about trying to balance the scales. We're not called to balance the scales. We're called to express faith in Jesus. And so I don't think that's the answer. I think the thing that Jesus wants us to understand, what he wanted Peter to understand, is that when we say that we love God, and we embrace this relationship of love that God has extended to us through Jesus, that there should be some evidence of that fact, right? Because the idea of love, like true love, like real love, has evidence, right? And in this case, love has action. And I think we all know that. It's not just a God thing or a Jesus thing. I mean, imagine if I run around telling you guys all the time that I love Bonnie so much, I love her so much, and I say it like 100 times a day to the point that you're sick of hearing it, right? But then you watch me interact with her, and I never really talk to her, and I don't do anything she asks me to do, and I come and go without really letting her know what's going on in my life, and I just disappear for a while, and I come back periodically, never really kind of connecting with her in any way. Would you look at that situation and go, he loves his wife? You shouldn't look at that situation and say he loves his wife, because the evidence doesn't back it up, because real love, true love has action. And that's the point that Jesus is making to Peter. That if you love me, do what I've asked you to do, right? Go share this message with other people. And I think that one of the things that Jesus, I think, was really trying to drive home there, because he could have just said, hey, you know, if you love me, go do what I've asked you to do. But he says it 3 times. And I think that part of what's going on there is that Jesus understood that human beings were going to tend to be drawn to religious activities. That people would be drawn to doing religious things over caring for one another. That people would be drawn to, you know, fancy pieces of glass and special pendants, and none of those things are wrong. Don't send me emails. Oh, you can send me emails if you want to, right? But none of those things are wrong. But they're not the main thing. That Jesus knew that there would be this tendency of human beings to be drawn to religious practices over caring for people. In fact, we know that if you read through the Gospels, if you read through the New Testament, that's what had happened, right? That somehow people thought the relationship with God was all about religious activity, to the point of ignoring the needs of people and caring for people and sharing that message of Jesus, or in their case, God, with other people. And so Jesus wanted to make the point clear. Religious activity is fine, right? Religious symbols are fine. Anything you do that helps you feel closer to God is a good thing. But do not put those things ahead of reaching people, of caring for people, to being the presence of Jesus to people. My friends, the gospel accounts, and we have 4 of them, right? 4 different people wrote about the life of Jesus, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they all tell us the same thing, that our relationship with God through Jesus is a relationship that is about faith, and that we are forgiven through faith, not activity. But they also point out really clearly that once we express faith in Jesus, we're not done. Right? The faith is a starting point that leads to action. Right? Action of caring for one another. And again, that means meeting physical needs, walking emotionally with people, and sharing the message of Jesus. So my friends, as we look at this incredible gift of Easter, right, that God so loved the world that he did send his only Son, who died and was resurrected to reconcile us to God. It's an incredible gift, but it's a gift that we only really experience when we share it. It's the kind of gift, if we just try to hold on to it, we never quite get it. But when we're willing to embrace the invitation that comes with that gift, it changes lives. It'll change your life as you do it. It will change the lives of people that you interact with. So my hope is that for each of us, as we actually embrace this Easter holiday and you spend time with your family today and you think about people you care about, that you would be motivated to invest in the lives of others, including being willing to share your faith. You know, invite people to church, to get together with people and be willing to talk about real things. Don't just talk about the weather, right? Talk about things that matter. Because you know what? People are hurting. And people are alone. And people are struggling. And we have a chance to make a bit of a difference by being the presence of God in people's lives. And when the opportunity is right, sharing that message of Jesus with them. So my prayer for each of us as we head into kind of this new season, the spring season, that we embrace a newness in our own lives. And we share that newness with others.